Hello, everyone. I am Patricia Butler, and I am the CEO and co-founder of ArtistWorks. Just in case you don't know who we are an online music instruction company and work with 35 world-renowned musicians who have come to our studios kicking and screaming to the Napa Valley, and they've recorded probably about 25 hours of lessons in each course for you to learn from. But what's different about ArtistWorks 2 is that you can submit a video to these great master musicians and they'll respond with the video, and those two videos together make a video exchange, and everybody gets to learn from them. But what's interesting today is that we are talking with our banjo teacher, one of them anyway, and that is Tony Trischka. And he's brought a couple of friends along with him to dive into this subject that we had a podcast on today as well, that is exploring the bluegrass styles. Like a lot of other musical genres, there are sort of subgenres, or at least different styles of playing that kind of music. And we thought we would start with bluegrass, but we are going to have a couple of other podcasts. And we're also going to have these live events that talk about exploring the styles of jazz and blues and rock and country and all of that. So many more of these to come. But welcome to the live dispatch from home. We are joined today by Tony Trischka, the teacher of banjo at ArtistWorks, one of them, and also Béla Fleck, who is the founding member of Béla Fleck and the Fleck Tones, and also Sierra Hall. All of them have been very influential on the evolution of bluegrass styles. So we're happy to hear what they have to say and also hear and see some of their musical demonstrations. Your questions are welcome. And so we're going to start our live dispatch from home, exploring the styles of bluegrass like we always do, and that's with some music. And today I'm quite happy to be joined by Tony Trischka, and he's going to start us off. Here it is, Tony.
Thank you, Patricia. Hello, everybody. I'm very excited to be here with Béla and Sierra, and I'm going to start off with more of a traditional style, Earl Scruggs' version, pretty close to that anyway, of John Henry, the Steel Driving Man.
That was great, Tony. Thank you so much for that. How about we introduce Sierra and Béla? Look at that right there.
Hey, people.
Sounding good, Tony.
Yeah.
That's fun.
Thank you. So I don't want to put Béla on the spot right away, but since I just played John Henry, the Steel Driving Man,
yes.
Perhaps I understand you have a poem that kind of relates to this song. Is that something you would care to regale us with right off the bat?
Well, it's actually an old lyric that I found when I was looking at old lyrics the other day. And it's all about, it's a different sort of story of John Henry. And it turns out that John Henry, it wasn't actually a hammer that he swung back in the day. He was actually a barber. And so the song is all about how he picked up a scissor and a little piece of wool, and he said, "The scissor's going to be the death of me, Lord, Lord. Scissor's going to be the death of me." I know it's hard to believe, folks. But the second verse is all about George Clooney said to John Henry, "Got to bring that Flowbee around, and I bring that Flowbee out on the job and chop that hair on down." So you see, it ends up being a fight against man and machine, a barber versus the Flowbee. And for people who don't know about the Flowbee is a device that cuts hair all the same length using a vacuum cleaner. Thank you.
Thank you, Béla.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's the actual original traditional lyric.
Yeah.
Took the same melody and wrote John Henry to it. So.
And that's where Bluegrass is going.
Okay, so So that's how this is going to go, I guess.
Haircuts and beards.
Off
And,
to a good start.
yeah, Béla, they both just started growing in. They're a little shorter than they've been. So.
Oh my
I
gosh.
realized when I was invited to be part of this, I didn't have a beard.
I'm sorry.
I didn't have a banjo. I mean, I just wondered how I was going to fit in. So the least I could do is wear my more banjo shirt, folks.
And thank you for that, Sierra.
Yes.
We're
yes.
feeling the love.
Where did you get that shirt?
This is a Béla Fleck banjo camp shirt that was bestowed upon me at the Béla Fleck banjo camp that I somehow finagled my way into.
Yeah, it shrunk. It was mine.
Years ago.
It shrunk in the wash, and then we resold it.
Oh my gosh. So maybe what we're really exploring is bluegrass humor.
Entrepreneurism.
Okay, yeah. That sounds good. I love it. Okay, so
to make a living, so you got to be good at working it, right?
Got to wear all the hats.
Yeah, you got to do a lot if you're in the bluegrass. Because people that work in bands, a lot of them have to have other jobs, and find ways to get by when times are tough. So, cut
Are
hair.
you some Flobies on your site?
Not yet, but I'm looking into it.
Okay, good. Just curious. Yeah.
the question is, have you ever used a flow beat, Béla?
I'm going to take the fifth on that. On the grounds that it may incriminate me.
Is that a banjo joke?
I didn't even mean that.
He's just got jokes coming out and doesn't even realize.
I just
Oh
really
my
like George Clooney.
It's got a man crush.
George
Oh
Clooney
God.
or James Egan.
Yeah. Well, Patricia, why don't you rein us in here?
I was just gonna say, yeah, right.
Voice of reason.
Like I have control over this.
Another 10
Yeah.
minutes easily.
Well, I know, but that's okay. It's all fun, but and I'm quite happy to enjoy all of your comedic comments. There's something about banjo play. You're all funny. Noam Pikelny had us in stitches when he was recording his curriculum. You guys are hilarious. I love it.
Is he funnier than we are? Or?
May I take the fifth?
Yeah, you can take the fifth on that too. All right. Okay, just saying.
No, let's get serious now. Let's talk about saxophone. I mean, let's talk about bluegrass styles. Tony, you need to lead us off here because you gave me a bit of an education in the podcast we did here. And we all know Bill Monroe, father of bluegrass. Then things started changing. And what I found interesting is that people that maybe identify they're playing with progressive or newgrass or whatever we want to call it these days still keep their foot in the tradition of bluegrass. I find that fascinating, and I know you all have something interesting to talk about the distinctions between the different styles of bluegrass. And then there's whatever it is that Béla plays, because it's so unique and yet seems somehow to still be bluegrass. So I will maybe not bow out of the conversation. I'm going to have some questions, but Tony, maybe you could kick it off and let's start talking about some of the different styles.
All right. Well, it all started with Bill Monroe, the father of bluegrass, and it's very rare that somebody would invent an entire musical style. And it's interesting that in 1945, in bebop music and jazz, you had Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie kind of inventing bebop. And at exactly the same time, Flatt and Scruggs joined Bill Monroe, and they're joining Bill Monroe, especially Earl Scruggs joining Bill Monroe. That became the template for all bluegrass to follow. To this day, if you're playing traditional bluegrass, you're going to go back and that's your touchstone. And I know that the three of us all still, to varying degrees, consider bluegrass to be at the heart of what we do, or we're coming out of that in many ways. But when Earl Scruggs joined, he was playing Scruggs style as he himself looked at it. And this was in October of 1945. And suddenly between him and Lester Flatt and Chubby Weiss on fiddle and various bass players, they had the sound that continues to this day. And Earl Scruggs himself considered what he played to be Scruggs style. I guess not Uncle Dave Macon. Grandpa Jones was backstage at the Grand Ole Opry one time, and someone said, "Hey, Grandpa, what style do you play?" And he said, "Well, I play that frailing clawhammer style." And at that moment, Earl Scruggs walked in, and someone said, "Hey, Earl, what style do you play?" And he said, "Well, I play Scruggs style." And people were playing that three-finger style before that, but he just made it more exciting. His timing was amazing. He invented all these extra licks that no one else had played before that. And when he played with Bill Monroe, people would introduce Bill Monroe by saying, "So here's Earl Scruggs with that fancy banjo picking, and now Earl, you get Brother Bill, and let's get started." And this is Bill Monroe's band. So Earl Scruggs was quite the phenom back then in the mid to later 40s by doing all these licks and all that sort of thing. So that's where it all started. And again, Bill Monroe took old-time music in the Scotch-Irish fiddle tradition and blues and put it all together to create bluegrass. But again, 1945 was the big bang for bluegrass, which continues to this day. But then, of course, there have been offshoots of that. And rather than prattle on a little bit more, do either of you two want to just kind of carry it forward a little bit?
I'd like to bring up something and run it by Sierra. If you're a banjo player, we lead a very confused existence, because on one hand, we're told you got to play it like it's done. Like, we get this very strong indoctrination that if you don't do it in a certain way, and I'm talking about Earl Scruggs, J.D. Crowe, those kinds of players, there's almost a shame that if you can't kind of do that thing. And yet at the same time, we're also told that we're supposed to go find our own way, that no banjo player has really become successful by just imitating those guys. So we get these confusing messages. I'm just wondering on the mandolin whether you have similar kinds of conflicting messages.
I don't know if it's quite as much as banjo. I think banjo, I know what you mean, because even I've sort of seen that in the world of like banjo players and people learning. As far as like my introduction to it all, I mean, I learned a lot of tunes that are thought of as Bill Monroe tunes long before I ever heard Bill play them, because growing up, I never got to meet Bill. I never got to see him play live. So, he had already passed by the time I came around to playing mandolin. So a lot of what I was learning was already sort of second or third hand from people that had either listened to those tunes directly from Bill and maybe had learned them, or somebody had directly learned them and then showed it to somebody else. So my connection to it as a young person especially was kind of removed a little bit. Of course, I knew Bill Monroe's music and grew up like loving traditional bluegrass, but I think I also was a kid when that first Nickel Creek record came out, which, couldn't be further from a Bill Monroe record. So I think for me, it's been more of like going back now, even at my age, and trying to rediscover how Bill actually played some of that stuff, and realizing, like, I think as a kid, when I first heard Bill play, some of it could be perceived as like, well, that doesn't seem very fancy. That doesn't seem very, that sounds almost kind of easy or a little raw compared to if you hear like Chris Thile play something, or, the difference between hearing David Grisman, Sam Bush, and those guys play, and, back to Bill Monroe, and then kind of being in the middle of Chris Thile or Bill Monroe. It's so like for me now, it's only been as I sort of, I think, matured a little bit as a musician that I actually like have gone back and went, gosh, this is like mind blowing. And you think about the context of like him basically having no mandolin heroes per se to look to. I mean, he's studying fiddle players and old time music and Scotch Irish music and things like that, but it wasn't like he had a Bill Monroe album to sit down with and learn from. So when you think about it in that context, it's extra mind blowing, I think, to me as somebody who's really interested in trying to find my own voice as a musician.
Yeah.
Did you play a little bit of a Bill Monroe tune? Or something in the style, or just something that's coming out of Bill Monroe?
Sure, like one of the ones I always think of, just because it was one of my favorite tunes to learn as a kid. And again, I learned this from a guy that was teaching me mandolin. I didn't actually learn it directly from a Bill Monroe recording, but it felt like a tune that when you play it, you want to sort of embody some of that Bill Monroe spirit, the bluegrass stomp, because it's all built around this.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
But you know, he just played such fiery mandolin. I mean, I think that's the thing that I'm struck by. I was listening to his version of Tennessee Blues just the other day. Another tune that as a kid I learned and loved, and I think maybe learned it from, you know, somebody at a jam or something. And then maybe the recording I was most familiar with was the Skaggs and Rice version. And then, you know, going back and kind of later hearing Bill's version and just being like, man, you know, a lot of people could kind of learn to imitate the notes, because in some ways he wasn't always playing a lot of notes, you know, like you know, in a way you could say, well, that's kind of simple, you know, it's not like, you know, it's not like some big bunch of notes, but at the same time, to be able to play it with that kind of fire, that, I mean, hardly anybody can really replicate that part of what he could do with the mandolin.
Yeah, well, there's the fire, but also, which is awesome, especially some of those, there's an early recording of him playing Roanoke that always blew my mind. But I think also the way he will play a melody and he will start, well, like the quicker thing, the faster thing that you play to demonstrate what we call more complicated is actually very linear. Like every note is
totally
a separate note. And Bill will play the same note, but he doesn't always start it on the downbeat. He might start it one before. And he does all of these very tricky, weird things with less notes, but played in sort of odd ways, and interesting ways, I should say. Not odd, they're just interesting. He has there's always something interesting about where he's placing his notes, and yeah, I'm with.
Yeah, another thing about Monroe's playing, which I've noticed, is I've transcribed some of his solos, and you think in tunes that I've heard him play a million times on recordings, yeah, I know that solo, and it's good. It's, you know, it's Bill's style. But when you slow it down to half speed, he's got these notes in there that you don't even hear. They're so subtle, like really deep, amazing stuff that if you're only listening casually, you can miss it. And so he's got this whole other level going on that you only really catch if you hear it at half speed.
Yeah.
Something to that effect. We have a question here.
Only slugs can hear it.
That's true. Yeah, and snails. Yeah.
You remember that joke that Bill Keith used to tell?
I maybe was going to tell it, please.
Well, it was something about. Oh yes, a snail. I can't remember it.
I think there's a knock on the door, and the guy opens it up and looks around, and there's a snail waiting for him there. You take it from there, though, because I'm not sure I can finish this.
No, this is the one about a snail who is robbed. And, the police come by and they say, "What happened?" And he said, "I was robbed by a slug." And he said, "Well, what happened?" He said, "I don't remember. It'll just all happen so fast."
Thank you.
Bill Keith did a lot better. Yeah.
Well, that's the perfect segue, because we have a question here about the difference between Scruggs style and melodic style, and maybe you care to field that very question.
Sure. Well, I mean, melodic style seems to me to be all about alternating strings to play scales or arpeggios or whatever, where the Scruggs style is much more position oriented. In other words, we'll play out of the open position. I know I'm too far away here for you to see how incredibly good my banjo sounds. We don't really play scales in Scruggs style, but we play it in melodic style. And the weird thing about it is, when we play a scale, often we have to go to a lower string to get a higher note. So if you start a G scale on the open middle G, instead of going up that string, you go down to a lower string to get the next note. And then you get the next note open on the second string, fourth note on the third string at the 5th fret, and first string open, and so on. And there's a whole set of very complicated or very involved fingerings in order to get to make all the notes and scales ring. So in the end, you can start to do things like so. Obviously, it's not all about scales. It's really about playing fiddle tunes, learning how to play fiddle tunes. But it's evolved into an all over the banjo experience and into a lot of different keys, and a lot of music has come out of it. And Tony Trischka is one of the people who has brought a lot of it. And Bill Keith also inspired both of us quite a lot. But it's a whole world. Melodic style is a whole world. And I think in banjo playing, Scruggs style is a world, melodic style is a world, single string or Reno style or Eddie Aycock style, whatever you want to call single string, is a world. And a good banjo player has to deal with all of those three worlds. And they might, sometimes we'll have one who's like super strong in one of those areas, and that's usually good enough for them to be a great banjo player. And occasionally you find people who have like several of those techniques and they're really got it down. And then they've really got something going on. There's a lot of hybrid playing that goes on. Like when I think about someone like Ben Eldridge, I think about someone who's really mastered Scruggs style and melodic style and figured out how to blend them, marry them together. I think about Alan Mundy, and I think of him as being, also great at both of those things. Especially especially when it comes to songs, putting the banjo into songs and using both of those techniques to make beautiful music that combines them.
Yeah. Would you want to play a fiddle tune?
Me?
In the melodic style? Yeah.
So if I was to try to play that in single string style, I might do something like a. So, yeah.
Yeah, and what's going on to the right? Maybe just quickly describe the right hand in the single string versus the melodic style.
Well, in single string, it's almost like you're making your thumb and your first finger into a flat pick. So the thumb is the downstroke of the flat pick and the index is the upstroke. So if you were to do one string over and over again, I mean, Bill Monroe might do a pile of downstrokes. We would do that with our thumb. But using the thumb and the index, you would go. You could go real fast by going just on one string over and over, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. Sorry. And once you can do that on one string, you start bringing in without clicks, which is pretty hard. You start bringing in the other hand. You start adding the other hand and learning how to put it all together. It's actually pretty tricky. And once you start getting around the banjo with it, then you really have to know your instrument in a whole different way, because once you start to play the scales, you have to learn the banjo almost as a different instrument to find your way through all of that. It's like each of these styles demands you learning the banjo as if it was a whole different set of fingerings and ideas.
Yeah, like three new instruments almost.
Yeah.
You were talking about, and we'll come back to Sierra in just a moment, but I just wanted to mention.
Carry on, I'm loving it.
Okay. Talking about
More banjo.
people that combine Scruggs and melodic. Bobby Thompson, who was playing melodic style in the 50s, but people didn't want to hear it because they wanted to hear Foggy Mountain Breakdown. But one of my all-time favorite banjo players, and if you ever watched America's Great Cultural Export, Hee Haw, the theme to that was played by Bobby Thompson. But I'll play pretty much a note-for-note version of him doing Camptown Races, where he combines melodic and Scruggs style. So that kind of combines, yes, some Scruggs, melodic, and Ken Scruggs, melodic, just back and forth.
Yeah, and there's a tape where he does from like
Really like that.
or something where he's just like, that's the Bobby Thompson style right there.
Yeah, all that. All those blues things that people just fell in love with in the early 70s.
They loved to hate that stuff for a while there, but now that it's found its place in the broader language of melodic banjo, it's great. You know, I think there was a point when it was new and it was the thing, and there were people that just did that, and they were explorers. They were finding all these new places to play on the banjo, new sounds to make, and not everybody liked it.
Well, Courtney Johnson, with your predecessor in Newgrass Revival, did a lot of that, and he was great at it.
Yeah,
and a lot of people latched onto that. But Sierra, I want to get back to you.
Yeah, I do too. But I had a question though that I don't know that you guys saw in the private chat that came up.
I was about to ask that very question.
Well, before we go to that, Béla's talking about the Newgrass Revival, and one of the things that might be worth talking about is the changes that happened to the style of bluegrass with the Newgrass Revival. We had talked a little bit about this, rhythm and timing and all of that. And so maybe we could just talk a little bit about that. Then there's a question about what makes the bluegrass drive, so to speak, that was going to go to Sierra. I'm sorry to interrupt, but wanted to just maybe see if we could pose that question about the Newgrass Revival.
Yeah, I could chat on that for an hour and a half or so if you'd like. But the thing about Newgrass Revival is when Sam Bush named the band Newgrass Revival, he intended for it to be a return to the music of Newgrass. And the music of Newgrass was the Osborne brothers, Jim and Jesse, and the Country Gentlemen, who we don't think of as being as progressive as what later came to be called Newgrass. So his idea was having a band that did a modern version of that. But I think sometimes because the band was called Newgrass Revival, maybe they got a little more credit. I mean, they certainly would do a lot of credit, no question about that. But Newgrass was a movement. And Tony played a huge role in that movement. Bill Keith played a huge role in that movement. There's a lot of people, David Grisman. Those are some of the Yankee wing of the Newgrass movement, but it was widespread. It was just time for it to happen. Like sometimes they say, an animal in two different parts of the world will make the same breakthrough. And so, we have arguments about who started the melodic style or whatever, but it was time for the melodic style, So a number of people found it. A number of people developed it in their own beautiful ways. And that's the same thing about Newgrass. It was time because people couldn't really play the old music and have it represent them personally. They needed to find a way for this music to represent them personally. So now you had new people, like, for instance, Bobby Osborne or Charlie Waller, singing songs that suited their singing. And then later, as it came on to Tony Rice and Sam Bush singing, they had to find songs that suited who they were as people, but they still loved bluegrass so much they wanted it all to, they didn't want to leave bluegrass. It needed to represent them because they were artists. They weren't copiers, they were artists. That's my thought. But in terms of what Newgrass Revival, when you talk about the band, there's like several Newgrass Revivals. And the one I was in, we were a crack battle unit. I mean, the band was just very, very rhythmically powerful. And the combination of Sam and Pat and John and me together, it was such a great place to play banjo because everything was so dead on and accurate all the time. It kind of led to this sort of supergrass kind of playing. I remember Boone Creek and early Doyle Lawson bands and other bands coming after that had this like precision to the bluegrass that hadn't really been there before. And something was gained, like something was really cool about that. But there was also something that was lost because everybody was driving it so hard all the time that it didn't have those relief points that earlier bluegrass had. Like Platt and Scruggs, you hear, and Bill Monroe, you hear the solos push, the choruses pull back a little bit, they leap forward for the next solo. There's all kinds of ebb and flow, which is probably the thing I love the most about that style of bluegrass. And I think, when I started working with Nashville Bluegrass Band, trying to help them record, the thing I loved about them is they were one of the first bands of that time, after what I would call the precision grass movement, to incorporate flow, ebb and flow into their music. And so I think there's great things about all of it, honestly.
Yeah, having heard you guys, well, pre you and with you, with Newgrass, you guys just had incredible drive. So it brings us to the question of drive, which I'd like to put to Sierra. And if you'd like to talk about drive and bluegrass, what it is, how you get it, and if you want to demonstrate, if you even want to sing something while you're driving. You can't drink and drive, but you can sing and drive.
Don't worry, it's just tea.
I couldn't see it, so it's okay. I believe you.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I think kind of sets bluegrass apart from a lot of other styles of music, really, is that sort of forward-leaning sense of rhythm. A lot of popular styles of music don't necessarily have that in the same way. It's like if you think of like where the beat is, if you were to sit down and play with a metronome, of course there's different places you can actually still be in time and place the beat. So you can be right on it, dead on it, or you can be like a lot of drummers will place, their snare hit just like slightly behind, but they'll do it consistently. So it's still considered good time. But then in bluegrass music, we typically place the beat just ahead of the beat. The placement of the note is just ahead of the beat. So I think that sort of really contributes to being able to have that sort of forward-leaning excitement, and especially like what Béla was talking about is those old Bill Monroe albums and things like that, where there is an ebb and flow, where like maybe it'll slow down a little bit and it'll speed up. A lot of times you'll hear like the banjo solo, the whole band gets really excited and just forges ahead, and you definitely hear things kind of rush a little bit. But that's one of the things I find really exciting about bluegrass too. I don't mind that when the band's all really playing and moving together. So super fun. Something traditional play. Well, for me, I didn't grow up singing as many bluegrass traditional songs, singing lead on a ton of traditional songs, because when I would go to jams, being oftentimes the only female around, especially you banjo players, for good reason, always wanted to play songs in a lot of the keys that they were recorded in, or out of the positions they were that sounded best on the banjo. So oftentimes you'd hear, songs like Little Cabin Home on the Hill, or 9-Pound Hammer, or John Henry, if somebody wanted to sing that one, since you played that earlier. You'd always hear that in keys like G, A, or B. So to ask somebody to play that, and if I was going to sing some of those songs, I might need to do it in like, D or E flat, or a key like that. So oftentimes I would be the harmony singer, which I absolutely love. It's one of my most favorite things. But I was really intrigued by this Lynn Morris album the first time I heard it. Got too many pillows here. So this song kind of comes to mind, and I'm not sure where it originated, but I'll play a little bit of it. I can't seem to learn not to love you. You get to me every time. You're someone I just can't say no to, and you're so good at changing my mind. There I go down that wrong road again, going back where I've already been. And even though I know where it will end, there I go down that wrong road again.
I'm caught in the web you weaving, you and your soft, easy lies. Before I can think of believing, then I'm falling for you one more time. There I go down that long road again, going back where I've already been. And even though we know where it will end, there I go down that long road again. There I go down that long road again.
Thank you, Sierra.
Thanks.
Wonderful. You know, talking about drive, when you're by yourself, you're leaning forward on the beat, but where was that beat? You know, in other words, it's just you. I had this experience back in the early 80s. I was playing with this band called Skyline, and the way our band felt time was just sort of down the middle of the beat as opposed to ahead of it or behind it. And I was at some festival, and I started talking to Larry Sparks, banjo player. And Larry Sparks, for those of you who don't know him, wonderful singer, was played with Ralph Stanley in his original band after his brother Carter died, after Ralph's brother died. And anyway, so I started talking to their banjo player, and we decided to jam together. So we're in the parking lot, and we start jamming, and I didn't feel really locked in with him. And then I thought, okay, he's with Larry Sparks, so he's probably leaning forward. So I started leaning forward, and suddenly we locked in. But what are you leaning forward to? There's sort of this imaginary beat. How does that work? Anyone? Béla or?
Yeah, well, I mean, the constant is a metro. If you want to use a metronome to prove what like perfect flat time, unaltered, unstretched, unhuman time is, you know, nobody really plays like that in real life. But it's a great way to practice. But you know, Butch Robbins had this discussion about timing and about like the thing about it was drive means leaning on the front end of the beat, but are you allowed to actually speed up? Or he felt that it was possible to not speed up and drive, and so the way he phrased it was imagine like a train going by and four people standing in different cars on the train, and some of the people might be standing near the front of the car, and some of the people might be standing, you know, near the back of the car, but the train was going to be going the same speed. So that's an interesting thought, but my perception is that really speeding up is actually okay. I mean, within reason. There's a point where it becomes too much, and you go, "Hey, this is just taking off. It's just uncomfortable." Right. But if you were to check with the metronome and check the timing at the beginning of some of your favorite records and at the end, and it might have picked up a few clicks. Oh, somebody muted me. Hi. It might have picked up more than a few clicks. And in fact, I'll tell you a story. There's an album called Drive that I did, and the first track we cut on the first night of the session was called Whitewater. And we did our first take, and it was smoking. We were all excited to play together, and it was just killer. And we all came in and listened to it, and everybody said we got to the end of it. We were all kind of a little bit knocked out by it, but also I said, you know, what do you guys think? And Tony Rice said, play it again, man. And so we listened to it like several times, and my takeaway was that it sped up. You know, it's great. It's really cool. I mean, I was like, wow, it's really cooking, but it's speeding up. So I begged them to go back and do some more takes, and we did maybe 4 or 5 more takes, and we kept coming back in and listening to them, and then Tony would say, listen to that first one again, let's do that first one again. And it ended up we couldn't do any better, and I was a little worried about it. That, you know, we had crossed the line on speeding up. But, you know, recently I heard Chris Thiele talking about it and saying that, you know, something picks up a little bit, sometimes it's okay. And he pointed to that song as an example of it. So I think it's just a matter of how much, you know, it is okay. I mean,
it can be really exciting. I find like as a singer, there's a certain ground, like if you're doing a vocal song, especially, like stuff can just like, I just wrote a song a couple days ago that I was working on, and like there's this kind of mandolin riff I was trying to do that's like, but then I would start singing this song And, I would find myself like I record myself a lot just so I can kind of hear back what's going and what I need to work on. And I found like when I would start singing, it would just go, whoosh.
Yeah.
And in that case, it sort of felt like, oh, that's too much. Like, you have to find that kind of middle ground between. And so I was playing today with the click, and I was like, well, gosh, then when you do the riff, when you play the riff, like where the vocal's comfortable, then the riff feels less exciting. So I actually think there's some songs that, the instrumental sections, or in bluegrass, like the solo sections, leaning forward a little bit on a banjo solo, for example, can actually add energy to a song that if it was just kind of the same the whole time, it wouldn't be nearly as exciting. So I think even it can kind of rush a little and then kind of pull back a little during the vocals and things like that sometimes.
Yeah, me and Abby have had that experience of like working on our stuff, and we try to figure out what the beat is, what the tempo is, so that we can start it off at the same tempo every time. And we discovered that verses and choruses, like we have this conversation, and we would say something like, the verse is trying to be at this tempo, and the instrumental is trying to be at this tempo. The measures between those two might be at a slightly different tempo, and it's the same every time we do it. And you start to have a little bit of trust that it's actually a good thing, because there's a tendency, oh, well, we should play it with the click until we can make them all the same tempo. And if we're playing one part too fast, we should learn how to play it slower, and the other part's a little too slow, we should learn how to play it faster. But then you get into that thing that I'm talking about precision grass, whether you call what I do with grass or not, which I wouldn't necessarily, but that whole thing about everything having to be perfect because of some preconceived notion that perfect time is a metronome, and that perfect time isn't people that play things at various tempos in a song. So as a person who works really hard on my time, I want to be solid, and I want to be able to to play with people who have good time and connect really well with them. I don't think everything should be at the same tempo all the way through a piece. It becomes a little bit boring and static.
Definitely.
Yeah, we had that exact experience with our Skyline band. We played live with this particular tune, and it was fine, and it sounded good, and we played in time with each other. And then we went to record it in the studio, and we get in there, and we started realizing, oh yeah, the verse is faster than the chorus, or vice versa. I can't remember which way. And we thought, oh boy, this is a problem. We're going to record this. We better get it right. So we sat down, piped in a metronome into the room where we were going to record it, and we played along with the metronome. So we played the whole thing in time, and it felt so stiff and awkward. We just, just what you were saying, we just gave up and said, no, let's just play it. So it slows down and then speeds up. That's okay. And it's just what it wanted to do.
Right. So what can happen is, like, you're recording. It's a problem when you're recording. It's not a problem live. It's a problem when you're recording, because like you want to do a few takes, and you go, gosh, we just never got that one section, and then you go, well, let's take a few passes at that section, but you don't do it you do it at the tempo that the song started off, not the tempo that section is every time it comes around. Right. One of the amazing things about playing with Sam and Jerry and Tony Rice and those guys, and the Fleck tones too, is that as long as we start a song at a certain tempo, whatever changes happen within it seem to happen the same amount every time. So you could take a solo from 6 minutes into a song from the sixth take and marry it to the fourth take or the second take, because they were going to speed up about the same amount. But if you were going to just go work on the solo by itself and like have the whole band play solos for a while, which we do, we'll do anything to get a good recording, you better check the tempo against, the track you're thinking you're going to marry it to, or all of a sudden it's going to slow down, when the solo, that you think is so good, it won't work.
Yeah.
It's all about awareness.
Just wanted to jump in because we have a couple questions, as long as that's not too interruptive to this question, which I think has been very well received by the audience. We have a couple of questions and a couple of requests also that you guys play something. I know you can't play together, but wondered if you're open to maybe doing a call and response in any style that you want. If that's a possibility, maybe now is a good time. What do you think, Tony?
Okay, Béla? Sure, I guess.
Yeah. Are you sure? If not, we can take some questions.
Okay with me.
Let me start to say no. What I was going to suggest this earlier, that do something like Foggy Mountain Special and just take, take one time through. Well, I don't know, maybe 4 measures. I'm not sure, something like that. Just trading that around a little bit. But it's awkward because we can't do it in time. So
No, well, what we've done before is people just pass it. Somebody plays a section and then somebody else plays the next section, or you just do a call and response if you like.
Yeah, we did that.
Whatever you'd like to do. Whatever you'd like to do. I'm just trying to keep the crowd happy.
We did that with Alan Mundy, Tony, remember?
sorry.
We did that with Alan Mundy the other day.
Yeah.
Alternate phrases, and if there's a space between them, who cares? That sort of thing.
So why don't I play the G chord, you do the C chord, and then it'll go around to Sierra and just pass it around like that.
What song are we doing?
Foggy Mountain Special.
Okay.
Just a simple blues.
Let's try it.
What's that, Béla?
I'm interrupting you. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Okay. Edit that together now, please.
That was great.
I wonder if we sped up.
That's the question.
That's the question. Oh my goodness. So I just have one more question here. I'll throw out to you guys. I just will leave it to you to answer. Someone has asked, did you just get bored with the old classic style of bluegrass and therefore the old style and the old sound of classic bluegrass and therefore evolved it? That's the question.
I guess I'll field that question. First, I remember getting bored with Scruggs style after I've been playing it for a few years because, it's always those same licks. And because I just wasn't deep enough into it. And then, and so I started trying different things. In 1960, I started playing in 63. And in 1965, I went to the very first 3-day Bluegrass Festival in Fincastle, Virginia. And Bill Monroe was there, and Reno, and Smiley, and Stanley Brothers, and so on and so forth. And there was a banjo contest, and Ralph Stanley was one of the judges. And because I grew up in Syracuse, New York, and didn't have a traditional bluegrass background, even though I'd been listening to a lot of Bill Monroe and the Stanley Brothers and Flat and Scruggs, I played a little bit of 9-Pound Hammer for the contest and did something like. Something like that. Needless to say, I lost. So I think that might have been I don't know, not necessarily being bored with it, but just, well, let me try something different. I just happened upon that kind of a sound. But anyway, after being bored with Scruggs style for a while, I got the Scruggs book and found all the stuff that I'd missed. And to this day, I'm still, whenever I transcribe an Earl Scruggs solo, I find something new and exciting. And right to the end, I heard him a bunch before he passed, and he was always coming up with new things, subtle little things. You know, he wouldn't do melodic style because he told me one time, he said, it doesn't fit my role. But he would do Scruggs style and just come up with all these amazing permutations. So I think it's not necessarily being bored with it, but just having different environments. I mean, I grew up in the through the 60s and was listening to the Beatles and the Mothers of Invention and all sorts of crazy stuff and Night Parks. And so those sounds might make it into my playing, just like stretching things. And so that's why I was doing that. It wasn't because I was bored of bluegrass, but just I wanted to do something that was coming out of my experience and add it to bluegrass or permutate bluegrass in certain ways that satisfied me. How about you guys?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like Béla even kind of said something similar, I think, earlier about that, about people just being, you know, from a different generation or a different time and looking for their own way to feel like they're representing their self as an artist through music. And yeah, I mean, I love bluegrass. I always feel like, you know, bluegrass is totally home base. It's the thing that I think we all are lucky to have been kind of a part of this community and like such a awesome form of music that I really feel like if you get good at playing bluegrass, you can really take, I mean, it's such a style of music that requires a high level of, you know, dexterity and facility and good rhythm and all those things that we all kind of hold to a high standard for the music itself, that if you kind of really put your roots in that, like you can do a lot, I think, from that, because it really sort of lends itself to being able to like go other places because you've sort of developed the, you know, the finesse on your instrument that you need to be able to do other things a little more easily.
Yeah, if you're good enough to play bluegrass, then you've got certain technical ability, and if you're a curious person, you want to explore and see what you can do with those fingers and with that instrument. I think the point of the game is maybe the thing to question: why do you play an instrument? What's the reason to be a musician? And there are, you know, a lot of good reasons, but I think the person who wins is the one who figures out how to be themselves. And that can mean a lot of different things. Like for a person who bluegrass music is a great expression of who they are as a person, like a more traditional form of bluegrass, great. They found it. That's great. Now for somebody who, like, again, I come from New York City, Tony comes from Syracuse. I think it wouldn't ever really be honest for me to like be a traditional bluegrass player because I as much as I love it and as much as it jumped out and grabbed me out of New York and dragged me into this whole world that I love so much, I am not from a cabin home on the hill. I'm from 100th Street and West End Avenue. And so for me to be myself, my playing and what I am interested in should reflect who I am. And bluegrass is a central piece of it. This is this thing we were talking about earlier about on some ways I've always felt a little shame that I don't play like Earl Scruggs. Or Alan O'Brien once told me that he talked to somebody after I'd started the Fleck tones and said, "Whatever happened to Béla Fleck?" Said he could have been a great bluegrass banjo player. And this was at a point in my life when I was at the most successful maybe than I'd ever been, you know. And the bluegrass world can be very provincial, and it's all about people are into what they're into, and that's cool. They have that right. I mean, there was a time when it used to make me mad, like at times like when Tony. You would get these horrible attacks in Bluegrass Unlimited about things you had done or bands that you were in had done. And I found it to be very offensive because I think everyone has a right to do it their own way. And as artists, we're supposed to do it our own way. And I always thought you've been really good at being yourself on your instrument and with your musical ideas. You found a way to, you know, in a world where there's, you know, a lot of banjo players, a lot of people doing a lot of stuff, you've always found a way to find your way to do it. And that's what we're all after. I had to change my way of playing because I wanted to play so much like you know, that I actually had to go looking for my style because I already was a Tony Trischka, you know, and I couldn't be him. So I think everyone has to do that, but it doesn't mean you have to be more progressive. That's the only point I was trying to make, is that it can mean you can be even more traditional. You know, it's all about what speaks to you as a musician, as a fan, as a music lover.
Yeah, because in traditional bluegrass, that allows for a lot of different things. Speaking about mandolin, for instance, Sierra, you know, like in bluegrass, Earl Scruggs is it. You know, you have to be able to play Scruggs style if you're going to play traditional bluegrass. But then there's Ralph Stanley, you know, who's sort of permutated that in a slightly different way, and other people, but it still comes back to Earl. And the mandolin, there's Bill Monroe. He invented it, and he had his style, which he invented out of nowhere. He didn't play like that when he was with in the Monroe Brothers with Charlie. He just came up with this somehow. He went to the Crossroads, I think. And anyway, but when you're learning to play mandolin, I think people would more get turned on by Bobby Osborne, because it was easier to play that linear style. Monroe's style was so idiosyncratic and so hard to like imitate, that when Bobby Osborne came along with the Osborne Brothers and was doing this more linear scalar style, that's what a lot of people glommed onto. And I think for many years it was like that. I can think of Frank Wakefield as being one mandolin player. I think Monroe even said he's the next, you know, one of my generation that can do this, or something to that effect. And he had his own style, more bluesy, and that really influenced Gristman a lot. But he was sort of coming more out of Monroe, but most people weren't doing that. Jesse McReynolds was doing cross picking. And okay, I'm answering the question for you. I'm sorry, Sierra. Why don't you?
No, you're telling it like it is. So I'm loving it. Yeah, no, I mean, definitely. I think that it is a little bit different with the mandolin, because, you know, Bill Monroe's like, if you think of bluegrass at all, you have to think of Bill Monroe, and, you know, this is the instrument that he played. But how much it did change from when he was playing with his brother to like when Earl Scruggs came along. And, you know, I wonder, like, I don't know, just like how different Bill might have played if somebody like Earl Scruggs had never been a part of the picture. Honestly, it's hard to say, you know, what bluegrass might have sounded like had he not been a part of that band.
Yeah. Who were your big influences? Sierra.
Well, you know, Joel Lawson is probably the earliest mandolin player I remember hearing when I was a kid, because my family got really into a lot of those albums early on. My dad, even before I played mandolin, I remember hearing that. And I lived next door to my great aunt and uncle when I was growing up, and so he played mandolin a little bit and was self-taught. You know, honestly, I don't even know that he played chords very much. It's like he would sit around and play tunes like I'm playing it much more notey than he would have played it. You know, he would have played it a little bit more strummy, but I mean, I remember like hearing the sound of the mandolin and it being familiar. It never felt like the mandolin was a foreign instrument to me, even as a kid, because I'd heard him play it. And then, of course, hearing those early Dole albums, and then I got my first, well, of course, like hearing Sam Bush, Ricky Skaggs early on, you know, when I was a kid, and then getting like my first Tony Rice album, hearing somebody like Béla play, and J.D. Crowe, of course. But then I got my first Alton Krauss album and became like really just a huge fan. And so like I remember sitting around and playing with those albums like crazy that Adam Steffi played on, mostly because I just loved the music so much. I mean, I was instantly drawn to his tone and like how clean he played. To me, that sort of was a different sound than I had been currently listening to. And so I was really kind of drawn to that. And so I feel like studying him a lot as a young person really influenced the way I sound now. And then, of course, got my Nickel Creek record, you know, when I was probably about 9 or 10, and started my best to, you know, go through those albums and learn every note that I could of those. So, you know, gosh, huge list of people that I've loved and been inspired by. But I kind of started in some ways almost more progressive, and then have worked my way backwards just because, you know, that's the generation I'm from.
Right. Well, so you listen to a lot, I mean, you play a lot of Chris's things or worked on his stuff.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
You go use as much of the fingerboard as he does. You know, that's one of his, to my ears, just on a maybe simple level. He's just, rather than playing in one part of the neck, he'll be like in one solo, he'll just be way high, way low, and opening up that in terms of like one solo.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that that's something that I learned a lot from studying albums that, I mean, I remember trying to learn every note I could of Not All Who Wander Are Lost that Béla's on, and, trying to imitate that the most I could as a kid. But also, like, the thing, I feel like so many musicians sometimes think, well, where do you start, when you're trying to learn to play? And like, for me, I always tell people, find an album that you really love playing along with, that find an album that, whatever, you love the songs, you love the playing, something that would inspire you to sit down and actually try to study, play every note that you can. And it doesn't mean that you're going to be able to just get it right away. I mean, I remember trying to learn stuff off of those early, Nickel Creek records or whatever. And as I would get better, I would my ear would get better, and I'd go, oh, you know what? He's playing that, he might be, playing in this position and using open strings instead of like this, and things like that you don't have the ear for right away, when you're learning stuff. And so, kind of go back to them again and again and get new things each time. But I think really diving in to just the music you love is one of the best ways to actually be inspired to want to play. I mean, it was for me to go, what's going to make me want to pick up my mandolin? Yeah, I know we got to learn chords and scales and things like that, but I mean, I just wanted to be able to play music too, so I think you kind of have to find that balance of sitting down and trying to work through albums. And gosh, there's so much available these days with things like ArtistWorks and even just YouTube that you can learn so much from. So it's pretty great.
We do have what may be a final question. I don't care if we sit here all night, to be honest with you. I find this very interesting. We've had some questions on wine and what you should be drinking right now, and I'll wait to answer the wine questions, not right now. But one question that Stephen Moore just asked, I think it's an important one that all three of you likely have an opinion on. Where do you see the artists and the audience of the future taking this music? What do you imagine the next generations of banjo and mandolin players are going to be doing? And maybe I'll just tag on to that. Another person said, what do you think the perhaps change in instrumentations might be going forward? Anybody want to take that first?
Béla, do you want to take that?
Well, in terms of changing instruments, I keep resisting that. Like when I'm going to do something with a bluegrass combination, and maybe it's because I do it so rarely these days, I really want it to be that lineup. I want guitar, banjo, mandolin, dobro. But I know fiddle, bass. But I know that, for instance, Sierra is playing with a wonderful saxophone player who's made a lot of efforts to understand this music, and really sounds amazing. And you could tell us his name, because I can't remember it right now, Sierra.
Yeah, Eddie Barbash.
Yeah, so you found a way to come outside of the music, and it's not a guy playing bebop on bluegrass. He's really trying to learn bluegrass and play it properly on saxophone, which is really cool. And so that gives you some new colors to paint with, and electric guitar. And I think it's kind of more, it's more going to make your music, for the new songs you write and stuff. When you're writing new music, you have a lot of leeway to like get creative. But if you're trying to do something that is actually bluegrass or in a bluegrass idiom, there's still quite a lot that hasn't been done with this set of instruments. And especially once you throw in that idea that it's not about being busier and more complicated. That's not the only way to skin a fish. Skin a fish? Yeah, but you know what I'm saying? It's about personality. It's about finding somebody. Like, I think the people that are going to change bluegrass and make it new again are people with a strong personality and a strong perspective, something to sing about, and stuff that they like and stuff that they don't like, and not just somebody that can do everything, but somebody who has because your limitations shape you. But I think there's a tendency, like with someone like Chris Thile is a good example. You have an outlier. A cat who is like unusually adept at a certain pile of things, and he's so good that he starts to pull the mainstream in his direction. We had the same thing with Mark O'Connor on the fiddle, I think. And so you have a situation where everyone is trying to play like a person that really nobody should ever be able to play like that but them. You know what I mean? Because they're just so unusual and powerful and amazing players. And all of a sudden the whole track is trying to follow this guy. And I remember, Chris Steele came along and like, he's obviously one of the greatest players that ever picked up the instrument, but so is Andy Statman, who used to play with Tony quite a bit, and so is Sam Bush, and so are all of these people. And Grisman still knocks me out. I mean, the things that they do things that Chris would be the first guy to tell you he doesn't do as well. Chris does things they don't do as well, and that's what makes it so rich. So I think it's important that the new people that come along don't just attach themselves to the most progressive person. Like if you're a banjo player and you just try to play like me or Tony and Noam, you're missing a lot of the things that might give you your own voice. So I think about stuff like that. But I also think I'm talking about bluegrass when Tony mentioned to me this idea of talking about the future of bluegrass. I think the biggest limitation in bluegrass is vocalists. I mean, we got a lot of great players. We don't have a ton of Lester Flatts and Tony Rice, Alison Krause's. We don't have a ton of those people, and that's what defines a band. So I think if you find a great singer who has their own way of singing and playing, and you can play in their band, you're automatically winning, because those folks are kind of rare, especially ones that are good enough to play bluegrass in the band. They might have a great singer, but they don't play guitar good enough to play with the best players, but they were a good singer. You know what I mean? But like Tony Rice was so special because he was an unbelievable singer and a trailblazing guitar. He could do both. Tim O'Brien is a rare person like that. You are like that, Tony. No, I'm kidding, Sierra.
Thanks, Béla.
I'm babbling. I'm going to stop.
No, I've thought about that a lot though, because I remember when I would go get to jam with my peers and stuff as a kid, it always felt like, there's a handful of people that, actually cared about singing, but so often everybody just wanted to shred tunes, everybody just wanted to play instrumental stuff. And especially going back to, like I said, Dole Lawson being some of the earliest stuff I heard that is very centered around harmonies. And I grew up, singing in church and church music and the idea of harmony being just something that's always kind of been a part of my life. I always remember feeling a little bit of disappointment and thinking back gosh, why doesn't anybody want to sing, And I would have been happy to just sing tenor, but it was hard to get people to want to sing lead, and so I do feel like I would agree that's something that when I think about somebody like Tony, it would be exciting to know that a younger generation might be, just as focused on trying to sing really great songs and find their voice and caring about, because I feel like traditional harmony, that three-part harmony is one of the main things, as much as the banjo or the fiddle that defines bluegrass. You don't have that same thing in pop music. You have a lot of double leads and stacked vocals and things like that. It's not that there's no harmony, but it's not the same as just kind of that pure three-part stacked harmony that you can, swap around and have the tenor on top or have it down on the bottom. I love that. I think that's one of the really special things about bluegrass.
Yeah, and I think going forward, you don't necessarily have to have a quote bluegrass voice. I forget the Steel Drivers. What's the guy who became a country star? I'm spacing.
Chris Stapleton. Yeah.
Yeah, and he didn't have a bluegrass voice in my perception anyway, and yet he was leading that band. And so, as long as you're a really good singer, you can front a band. And but then it doesn't necessarily have to be bluegrass either as you go forward. So, yeah, that's. The vocal thing is, Michael Daves, who, not to plug ArtistWorks here, but he's got a school here on singing, bluegrass singing. And so hopefully people are learning to sing and getting trained, because he's one of these just great singers who hasn't toured a lot, but he's one of the best singers there is, I think. But yeah, and I'm not up on the bluegrass scene right now. I don't go to a whole lot of traditional bluegrass festivals. And maybe, Sierra, you know some more about that than I would. Are there people hot new singers that are around that you're aware of?
Well, to be honest, I've not been to any bluegrass festivals in a long time either. It feels like kind of feels like a lifetime.
Yeah. Well, no one's going these days, so.
I know.
Yeah.
Well, Billy Strings is a cool guy because
Billy
he's very
Strings.
being
Yeah.
himself, and he sings well, very well, and he plays very well, and he's got both, and that's why he can lead a band and represent another
Yeah.
generation of people, like a whole. And it's very important for people to see people their own age playing and singing this music like that. Like you sing Nickel Creek, I know maybe they're a little bit older than you, but it was in the ballpark, and so you could go, oh, I could do that, and you see that with rock. You get a garage band of kids in Seattle or something, and everybody gets excited because, hey, there's some new people coming along playing this music well, and it sets people, like there's a lot of folks that would, might not be that interested in seeing a bunch of old farts playing the music, but if they see someone their age. And I remember when, there was Newgrass Revival, we were still going, and Yonder was starting to really kick it, and like they had a bigger audience than we did because they had the young crowd and they didn't know us. That audience didn't know us. And so it was, but it was their age.
Right.
If you talk to the people that are going to check out Billy Strings, they might not know Newgrass Revival either, or Tony Rice, or Manzanita, or the J.D. Crowe Band, or your stuff, Tony, or so it's all about passing it on to that next group of people, and it doesn't necessarily have to be better. It just has to be personal to their. I mean, you can't argue better. What's better? There are all these great periods for the music. And
Totally.
But every generation needs some leaders, and that can make it new for their generation, I think.
Yeah.
And there is a lot of diversity. I mean, if you just look at someone, I was thinking about Danny Barnes, and he's not traditional bluegrass, but he can do clawhammer, and he does bluegrass, and he does 3-chord tunes, and he's got his own thing, just like John Hartford had his own thing. And so there's a lot of, as you were talking about before, individuality. Not just in the bands, but these just individual people that are doing great stuff and coming up with stuff.
Well, Hartford's just such a great example because he wouldn't call himself a bluegrass musician. I mean, it's central to his music, but look at everything he did and he built out of it, all these different periods in his musical life, and so many wonderful things and humorous things and challenging things that he did.
Yeah,
So-
I mean, I think about too, as far as like my generation goes, I said that about, going to a jam and people, always just wanting to just like burn a bunch of tunes instead of, and I was going, who can sing, Blue Ridge Cabin Home? Because it can't be me in my high pitched voice. Somebody do it. But there were, there's plenty of examples of great singers that also came along too, from Sarah Jarosz to Molly Tuttle to somebody like Trey Hensley. I mean, there's lots of folks out there that are, you mentioned Billy, but I don't know, like we've all sort of stepped outside of the traditional bluegrass world with maybe what we're doing now, but I know we all have strong roots in that and love that repertoire of music that we could all sit down and just know a lot of the same songs and have a big jam session.
If you're good, you ought to go, spread your wings outside of the bluegrass world and see what happens and what you might learn. I mean, I know Ricky Skaggs learned a lot from his experiences outside of bluegrass, and he brought them back with him into that world. And everybody, needs to have that chance to try things.
Agreed.
For sure.
Shall we go out on a musical note? There's one. That's one. Maybe more than just one, Béla. What do you think?
Be patient, Patricia. We're doing a thing. You just lost the contest again, Tony.
Dang.
I wouldn't dare end this thing without asking if there's any topic or subject, whatever you want to call it, that we haven't covered, you guys haven't covered. Anything final to say here?
I think we covered a lot. There are many other topics. The science, we can get into politics, but staying within our boundaries here. Well, I think, Béla, you've been saying it, and we've all sort of been saying it to varying degrees, that, find your own voice. And bluegrass is a great way to do that and spread out from there. You could look at so many different people that have done that. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I just spoke with George Whitty about developing your own musical style, and he very much said something that you mentioned in the beginning of the broadcast, Tony, and that was listen to a lot of other music. And I think Béla did too. It helps give you some flavoring, gives you some spice. And so maybe talking about the bluegrass styles is a wonderful introduction to help players develop their own style, even staying inside bluegrass, but listening to a lot of other genres helps, I would say, just add another ornament or add some spice to your playing. And you guys have talked a little bit about that, and I think it's probably pretty good advice. Do you have any parting advice, any of the three of you, on perhaps how people could develop their own musical styles a little bit?
Whoa.
It's a big topic.
I do think you mentioned listening. I think that's huge, really, because we are kind of, if people say we are what we eat, we are what we listen to, I think, in so many ways too.
Right.
But truly, I mean, it's funny to me how, like, even in the stuff that I've worked on, I truly do feel like I'm mostly a bluegrass musician at heart, because that's the thing that I spent at least a good, the first 10 years in my musical world being pretty darn immersed in. But I do think that, sometimes people will say, oh, they'll categorize some of the music I play now as maybe some form of jazz, or maybe think I'm really into jazz. And sometimes I'm like, well, actually, like, I do like a lot of jazz, but I also have been heavily influenced by other musicians who maybe have even dove into the genre even more than I have. And so that kind of trickle down effect of like listening to different things and how they sort of end up like I've spent a lot of time with Béla records, or, spending time, you mentioned Bill Monroe, but you think about like starting with that and going to, say, the Fleck tones or something like that. It's quite different musical experience, but yet there's all this kind of generation of people who have been influenced along the way, starting with Bill Monroe all the way to, more progressive forms of music that kind of come being inspired from bluegrass. And so I think there's so much to learn, even if bluegrass kind of is your thing, there's still so many different corners of it to learn and grow just by spending a lot of time listening. And I think like the listening element is huge, because that's one of the, especially even still, I think that's one of the greatest ways that I grow as a musician, is just spending a lot of time really, and not just casually listening while you're doing something else, but actually like, put on a pair of headphones and like really dive into something. There's so much to be learned just from that kind of intent listening and trying to go, when this part happens, oh, they're going from this chord progression to that chord progression, or the way they rhythmically phrase that stuff sticks with you as a musician more than I think we might give it credit sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's really true. I think another thing you can do is do free improvisation with no thoughts for, don't worry about timing or chords, or you just move your fingers around the neck and explore and see what you come up with. And maybe it would be just something traditional bluegrass, where you might just find sounds that interest you that you didn't even know existed on the neck. So, Béla does that sometimes in the middle of a big concert. He's very brave that way. He would just go out and start off a tune with a free improvisation, which is a very dangerous thing to do, because you can just fall on your banjo. Except Béla, I don't think I ever heard you fall on your banjo.
You don't want to start doing that.
Sorry?
You started doing that.
Well, I've done some. Pete Warnick did some. He used to do this at the this health food restaurant in Ithaca, the Moosewood, And he would go in there. This was in the early 70s, and he would say that he would tell me that he would go in there, and he would just play banjo for like half an hour, with not playing tunes, but just sort of free improvising.
Yeah.
And it's just a good way to explore your instrument and find new notes.
Get over yourself, right? You have to like not be uptight. Find ways to not be uptight. I've been having a lot of fun with my kids because we have this thing called Family Jam, and we just realized our son Juno doesn't really like to be told what to play. So it's not about, now you play this and I'll play this. It's like, no rules whatsoever. And we just start playing and singing and making noise together, and amazing. Every once in a while, something really fantastic happens, and that's this idea that it can be a lot of fun. But, I sometimes have really high pressure gigs, and I get really worried about them and real tense. And tension doesn't go with like improvising. Like great improvisers are all usually like hipsters. Like, hey man, everything's cool. Yours was like, yeah. It's not. He's not like, I'm so worried about how I'm going to play on EMD tonight. It's not like that. It's like, whatever, because that's the state of mind you need to be in for the flow to happen. The flow doesn't happen if you're like this. And so I live in both of those worlds because I can get tweaky, and sometimes I use that energy for practicing hard stuff, and I make progress with it. But I also there have to be times where you let go. Free improvising is a way, if you get over the fear of that idea of just playing something you don't know what you're going to play, and just get into, hey, I'm just going to play around and see what happens. So I'm going to play a note. And what if I play a different note? What if it's another note? Damn, you're doing it. You're already doing it. It doesn't have to be like playing, suddenly being Bach or something and playing. So, everybody's got to do that. The other thing about listening is, Chick Corea talks about this sometimes. He says there's times when you're inputting and times when you're outputting as an artist. There's times when you've got a lot to say, and that's not the time to listen to a lot of stuff. Like when the flow is going, don't go start listening to other stuff and throwing you off your game. Let your own voice start to come through. Pursue the idea. But when you're getting a little bit dry and nothing's coming, then go listen to something is great, and get turned on, and turn it off when you get real excited and get out your instrument and play. And that'll really give you some neat stuff, I think. It works for me.
Thank you, guys. Thank all of you. Sierra, wonderful to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
Consider yourself a friend of ArtistWorks from here on out, just like Béla is and has been for so many years. I don't even know how long I've known you, Béla. It's been a long, I think even longer than Tony.
Before I had a beard.
It's a million years. And Tony, of course, as always, love working with you. We've been together since August of 2009. Actually, before that, when we met in New York to talk about doing this, it's been wonderful. And so, Sierra, I'm happy to welcome you to this little enclave of musicians and teaching the world music. You guys really covered this subject. Thank you so much. I wanted to sort of have a resource for people to come back to, because this video will be available. And of course, Tony's podcast is available anywhere people listen to their podcasts. And I think this is an important subject we can keep building on over time. So thank you for helping us explore it a little more deeply, and for taking questions, and for playing. It was wonderful to spend an hour with you.
Thank you, Patricia, and thank you, Sierra. Thank you, Béla, for joining me.
Thanks for asking. You're an honorary banjo player now.
Yeah. More banjo. Okay, guys.
I'm going to go practice now.
Take care. Be safe. Be well. And we will do this again sometime soon.
Okay,
Thanks, guys.
Take care. Bye-bye.